I'm Dave Arthur, and this is another edition of Greatest Albums Reviewed. Today I am looking at an album that is often regarded as one of the best rock or punk rock albums of all time, and this is the debut album of The Clash. So, let's have a look at this amazing album, track by track, and with a bit of background information too. 8th of April 1977, and the world saw the release of the first Clash album, simply titled The Clash. It was released during a time in the UK when punk rock was at its height, with bands such as the Sex Pistols and The Damned playing tracks that told a story of the dissatisfaction of the youth at that time. It was the year of the Silver Jubilee of the Queen, but the youth even had a response to that via the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen. In August 77, the UK had the National Front marches, which led to counter-demonstrations and clashes. This was a few months after the release of The Clash, which makes it seem somewhat amazing that The Clash had sung about such clashes on the album. Was this a cool look into the crystal ball? Not really. It just showed the political temperature at the time. The Notting Hill Carnival had descended into a hellish orgy of mugging, stabbing, stone throwing and robbing as the young black community fought with the police that had continually harassed them. It seemed like a world divided by race, and with the youth sick to death of boring jobs, irritating overpaid bosses, lying politicians or living on the dole. And yes, the Sex Pistols were great at screaming at anything that annoyed them, but the Clash always seemed to have a more specific sense of direction, and their songs about social injustice were understood by pretty much every person in the country, not just the kids. People that were tired of the perpetual lies and the drags of living in 70s Britain. The album went gold in the UK and in the US, eventually when it was released in 1979, and it reached number 12 in the UK charts. Singer and guitarist John Mellor, known as Joe Strummer, born in Ankara, Turkey to British parents in 1952, had been in a couple of bands before forming a rhythm and blues band in 1974 called the 101ers. His early musical loves included Woody Guthrie, Little Richard and the Beach Boys, later saying that the Beach Boys were the reason he started to play music. He would also tell the story of how he once saved up for a ukulele and was taught to play Johnny B. Good on it. Strummer identified as a socialist and once said that it was because socialists were more humanitarian, rather than every man for himself and I'm alright Jack and all those businessmen with all the loot. It was when an unknown Sex Pistols opened for the 101ers that Strummer became more aware of punk rock. He was impressed by them, and after the gig he was approached by Bernie Rhodes and Mick Jones and asked if he wanted to form a band with them. He agreed and joined Mick Jones, Paul Simonon, Terry Chimes and Keith Levene to form a band that Paul Simonon christened The Clash. Mick Jones, singer and lead guitarist, was born in 1955 London to Welsh and Russian parents. Like Joe Strummer, Jones went to an art and design school because he thought at the time that was how you joined bands. In the early 70s, Jones was playing glam rock with a band called The Delinquents, but then he met Tony James of Generation X and later of Sigue Sigue Sputnik to form a pub rock band called London SS. Before London SS broke up, they got into punk rock after the Sex Pistols became famous. And as mentioned before, he was with Bernie Rhodes when they met Joe Strummer and convinced him to help form The Clash. Paul Simonon, bass player and sometimes vocalist, was born in Croydon, South London in 1955, but he grew up in the areas of Brixton and Ladbroke Grove. Simonon would later write and sing on the song The Guns of Brixton for the classic London Calling album. Simonon also went to an art college and he had plans to become an artist. It would seem that his training was not in vain, as he was often credited for a lot of the visual aspects of the band, like the backdrops and the clothing. Simonon is also the guy smashing the bass on Penny Smith's cover photo of London Calling, surely one of the most iconic rock visuals of all time. Simonon met Jones in 1976 and 6 months after meeting him joined him in the band that he named The Clash. It's often noted that initially Simonon was not able to play the bass and learned notes wrote from Jones. However, he eventually picked it up to become one of the most iconic bass players in rock history. Drummer Terry Chimes, or as he was called on the album Tory Crimes, was born in Stepney, East London in 1956. He met Jones and Simonon through the local music scene and became the first drummer of The Clash alongside drummer Jones, Simonon and Levine. He played on the first album before leaving and being replaced by Topper Headon, who is usually referred to as the Clash drummer. However, when Headon was dismissed from the group in 1982, Chimes was asked to rejoin. The Clash album, which reached number 12 in the UK, was described by Billboard as punk as it gets. It was written and recorded over 4 weeks and with a budget of £4,000, but it shows how the different musical geniuses of Strummer and Jones complemented each other for the first time. It's an album full of rage and was considered to be far too raw and angry for the taste of the Americans, and the album was not released in the US until 1979, and even then there was a different track listing and order, with some songs taken out and replaced by other songs that had been recorded over the previous 2 years. For the sake of this review, I will be discussing the original UK version. So, let's have a look at the tracks that made up the first Clash album. Track 1, Janie Jones. Janie Jones was a song that was about a former English singer who in the 70s became known for holding sex parties at her home and for controlling prostitutes. It is said that Joe Strummer found her interesting and wrote the song's lyrics in her honour. Mick Jones is said to have come up with the tune on a number 31 bus that went from Harrow to Chalk Farm in North London. In the video of the song, Janie Jones is seen being chauffeured around London by Mick Jones. In 1982, Janie Jones recorded a comeback song called House of the Juju Queen, and not only was this produced by Joe Strummer, but also featured members of The Clash and the Blockheads, with them going under the name of The Lash. The story of the song is simply about the boring existence of a guy, someone who has a boring job that he hates, but he loves rock and roll and getting stoned, and he's in love with Janie Jones. And so he decides to meet a lady after work for some fun. The bored guy is in a job that not only bores him, but which he only does for the money that it gives him, for as Strummer sings, but he's just like anyone, he's got a Ford Cortina that just won't run without fuel. Janie Jones was also involved in a radio payola scandal, and Strummer refers to this when he says that there's no payola in his alphabetical file. The Clash were known for their anti-establishment stance, fueled by Strummer's socialist ideals, and when he sings that the bored man is going to speak to his boss and really let him know how he feels, you can feel that he isn't just talking about one fed-up guy, but the average guy in the street who would love to tell their bosses what they think of them. It's an important song for The Clash and was a staple in their set list for most of their live performances, and when you think of how Janie Jones went to a Clash gig and was met by Strummer, who sat at her feet, then you know that his affection for her was probably the very reason why. Track 2, Remote Control. Remote Control isn't the heaviest of Clash songs, especially on this album, but lyrically it is a great rant against the haves of the world, the people who control the money and those that make the laws, the feeling of oppression that everyday people feel just because they are working class, and the expectation that we have to conform to their rules and regulations. However, it's said that the band took a negative opinion of the song after their label CBS went behind the band's back and released it as a single when they went on tour. The band actually wanted to release Janie Jones. To the likes of Joe Strummer, this was an example of everything that he disliked. To make matters worse, the B-side was a live version of London's Burning that the band had mixed, but when it was delivered to CBS, they remixed it, much to the band's dislike. This episode is recounted in the later song Complete Control, when Strummer growls that the label said release Remote Control, but we didn't want it on the label. As far as the Clash were concerned, Remote Control would flop as a single and Janie Jones was a much stronger tune. This is a song that features both Jones and Strummer as vocalists, and this works well as we have Jones narrating the facts behind the song, while Strummer does the raging with his inimitable rage-filled voice. The lyrics tell us of the remote control from the Civic Hall. This is probably referring to the bureaucrats that had cancelled concerts for reasons best known to themselves. We hear of the grey weather of London town and the panda cars that are crawling around, dispersing those that had nothing to do, begging the questions, where can we go now? The anger against what could be perceived as a totalitarian authority is clear in the words in the third verse that state, "Big business, it don't like you, it don't like the things you do, you got no money, so you got no power, they think you're useless and so you are, punk." Who needs the Parliament, they ask? Who needs the laws when they are fat and old and queuing for the House of Lords? In other words, when these politicians have lived their cushy life-filled lives as MPs, then they have an even cushier time in the House of Lords waiting for them. You can totally understand the anger behind the words. Perhaps my favourite part is at the end when the band repeat the word repression 4 times, and after each time Strummer spits out lines like, "I'm gonna be a robot," "I am a Dalek," and "I obey." In short, we aren't people. We are treated like nobodies, like robots, by people who will never understand the trials and tribulations of working class life in 70s UK. Despite the band having an ambivalent attitude towards the track because of the actions of CBS, it is one of my favourite Clash songs because it lyrically just tells the truth. And as they say, look out for those rules and regulations. Track 3. I'm So Bored with the USA. This track doesn't pull any punches about its view of American politics, but fortunately it seems that the American fans of The Clash didn't seem to take it to heart, considering their huge success on the other side of the pond. The thing is, this was lyrically never originally meant to be a political song, as Mick Jones' original lyrics were called I'm So Bored With You, and was allegedly a song about Jones's girlfriend at the time. It's said that when Jones played Strummer the track, he misheard what Jones had sung. There are versions out there on bootleg that have the track with its original lyrics, but at a gig at London's Roundhouse in 1976, the new anti-American lyrics were used, and the rest, as they say, is history. Or geography even in this case. You have to love the humour of the band though, as this track was often used as the opener of its 1979 American tour, and this was, according to Strummer, just to see if the Americans had a sense of humour. I just wish I had been in the crowd then, just to see the reactions of the fans. It's said that initially the song was booed by some parts of the crowd, but eventually the boo subsided, and it wasn't unusual for the US crowd to sing it back with some passion. However, before any Americans got too hot under the collar, it was best that they actually took apart the lyrics, as they may have actually agreed with what this London band was telling them. An example of this is when in the first verse, Strummer sings that a Yankee soldier wants to shoot some skag, but he meets it in Cambodia, and now he can't afford a bag. This was an attack of the US involvement in the Cambodian War, when the US assisted the central government there with huge aerial bombing campaigns and also financial aid. The song also directs stinging rebukes against the idea of the US pushing their culture and ways to the rest of the world, with lyrics talking about how the Yankee dollar talks to the dictators of the world, and also how Yankee detectives are always on the TV. They also state that this is because killers in America work 7 days a week. This could be seen as a slur against the US murder rates, and that it's somewhat hypocritical for the US to see itself as the #1 country in the world when they have such a problem. Likewise, Strummer sings "Never mind the stars and stripes, let's print the Watergate tapes," which again is pointing out that not everything in the American garden is rosy. If this song had been written in 2021, you could wonder if the presidency of Donald Trump would have been in their sights. They also mentioned shows like Kojak and Starsky and Hutch, which the band said that they actually liked, and also the phrase "new wave" is mentioned, as in "I'll salute the new wave and I hope nobody escapes." This could be the first time that this phrase is mentioned in a song, and it refers to a musical genre that was prevalent in the UK in the late 70s and early 80s. It was like an offshoot of punk, but it still had anti-establishment songs. It can be said that there is an element of hypocrisy in that the Clash made a fortune in the US and were happy to pose with American images or wear American-style clothing. But if you can get by the blunt words of the chorus, you will see that it's not a song that is criticising everything about the US, rather than the government and its actions. And bearing in mind that they did this with serious vitriol against the UK government, then maybe our allies were fair game too. After all, the impact of many aspects of US culture is there in everyday UK life, especially in the 21st century, with an ever-shrinking world because of the internet. This also wouldn't be the last time that the band looked at US politics, for example in the track Washington Bullets on the triple vinyl Sandinista album. It's a fast-paced track with a hell of a hook in the chorus, and politics aside, deserves its place in the echelons of classic Clash tracks. Track 4, White Riot. So, was the previous track infamous enough for you? Then you ain't seen nothing yet, as we look at the fourth track, White Riot. This was the Clash at their heaviest, playing a hectic song that throbs with anger as it rails against the injustices of the treatment of poor black and white people. It was the first Clash single and reached number 38 in the UK charts. It's a classic Clash track, and according to Caroline Coon, was played with the force of an acetylene torch. A brilliant metaphor if ever there was one. And just like a quick burst of an acetylene torch, the song runs for 1 minute and 58 seconds, giving a blazing, passionate, anger-fueled performance that leaves you in no doubt where the singer's politics lie. It's been said that the song was inspired by the 1976 Notting Hill Carnival that ended in riots, in which Joe Strummer and Paul Simonon attended. Strummer and Simonon also lived in this area, and you can sense the effects of living there in the first album. Notting Hill may be a lovely leafy area to live in now, but back then it was a place where you had the rich well-to-do on one side and the poor on the other, and a lot of the poor were Jamaican immigrants. However, there are many people that initially saw the song as a tune about a race war. I mean, doesn't the title suggest that? If you were one of those people though, you clearly hadn't read the lyrics, or just clearly misunderstood what the song was about. The truth was, Simonon and Strummer had seen plenty of oppression in the Notting Hill area. They lived in an area with a high number of black families, and they saw with their own eyes the way that members of their community would be stopped by the police and questioned on a daily basis. The Notting Hill Carnival in 1976 was to show that the black community had had enough, and the carnival descended into violence. White Riot would tell this story, for example, with the lyric, "Black man got a lot of problem, but they don't mind throwing a brick." But the problems of the working class were not just a problem with the black community, with the UK suffering from high inflation and high unemployment. It was hardly surprising that a lot of the youth turned to the anti-establishment of punk music. However, Strummer wrote a lyric that questioned why it was that the working class white people were not hitting back at the powers that be in a way that the black community had. Strummer sings that white people go to school where they teach you how to be thick. And then, in a verse that makes it clear what they think of the government, they sing, "All the power's in the hand of people rich enough to buy it, while we walk the street, too chicken to even try it." So, having seen the black community hitting back at the powers that be, wasn't it time for the white working class to do the same? Hence the chorus of, "White riot, I want a riot, white riot, a riot of my own." So, the song isn't a question of a race war, but rather a call to arms for the working class oppressed of both colours, for the white community to hit back at their treatment just like their black counterparts were doing. As Strummer told the NME, the poor blacks and the poor whites are in the same boat. But Strummer would also suggest that unlike the black community, there were whites who couldn't see these problems. As far as some whites were concerned, everything's too cosy, they've got stereos, drugs, hi-fis, cars. This is a great Clash track, but it's one that Mick Jones often refused to play. He considered the song to be crude, and it didn't help when the song became misused by some punks and white nationalists, and therefore some venues that the Clash played would ask them not to play it. Strummer would refuse this, as he would argue that the meaning of the song was not to be one of white power, and in fact he would later continue to play the song with his band, the Mescaleros. The B-side to White Riot was another classic short Clash song called 1977, a heavy, angry tune that reflects the attitude shown on White Riot, with Strummer growling about being too long on the dole and living in a world that surely can't go on forever, even though the papers say it's better. To my ears, this is a great accompaniment to White Riot, as it clarifies the storyline that White Riot gives us, that is, living in a world that promises nothing. Billboard called White Riot the most controversial song The Clash ever did, and to an extent they may be right, but it's important to know that it was controversial for the right reasons, and not for the opinions of those that just didn't get the lyrics, and the emotions that led to their writing. Track 5. Hate and War. Hate and War has vocals by Jones and Strummer. Jones sings the main verses, with Strummer growling the final verse, where he makes it clear all the things that he hates. According to Strummer in an interview with Uncut magazine, the phrase hate and war was meant to be in direct opposition to that of love and peace, as love and peace is a phrase connected to the hippie movement of the 60s and alludes to optimism in the future, whereas hate and war is alluding to the pessimism of the 70s, often covering a lot of the negative situations that have been mentioned in other tracks on the album. It's a track that is very much about life in the working class London community, about how you have to toughen up if you want to survive. For example, Strummer sings that I have the will to survive, I cheat if I can't win, if someone locks me out, I kick my way back in. Then doubling up on the anger that some people felt by singing, and if I get aggression I give them 2 times back. This is again a reflection of the attitude that was common in the poorer people of London town, with the total lack of connection with the government and the police and law and order in general. The lyrics are a sign of the anger of people in London, but the tune itself rocks along a medium fast pace, and despite the title isn't as heavy as White Riot. Tracks like this make me think that whilst the Clash were initially classified as a punk band, quite a few of their tracks were more like a fast rock sound, which may have made their albums more accessible compared to the music of other punk bands. And this was especially so when they started to play reggae-based tunes that reflected the areas where they had lived in London. The final verse suggests that when it came to being angry, the band were equal opportunity critics. They were more than happy to criticise the English as well as people from other countries too. Strummer sings after the chants of hate and war that I hate all the Englishmen, they're just as bad as wops. I hate all the politeness, I hate all the cops. The use of the word wops was obviously controversial and racist, as was the final line of not being bothered if he was beaten up by any rotten Greek. But I would imagine that if anything, it gave an idea of what a lot of English youth were thinking and the feeling of tension between many of the cultures in London at the time. It's a track that was played every so often on live tours, but it's one that is yet another reflective landscape of the intense and angry place that parts of urban London was. Track 6, What's My Name? What's My Name is a fast-paced and heavy track that is the only one that credits ex-guitarist Keith Levene with a writing credit. It's quite explosive in places and has a repetitive chorus of what's my name, name, name that is really catchy and has been an earworm of mine for many years. This is a track that isn't so much as criticising the establishment this time as being a rant at yourself and members of the family, and with a particularly disturbing last verse. For example, Strummer sings, what the hell is wrong with me? I'm not who I want to be. I tried spot cream and I tried it all. I'm crawling up the wall. This could well be seen as somebody that is struggling in their environment, that they want to make improvements, but no matter what they do, they are just going mad. He then later sings of how he was nicked for fighting after failing to join a ping pong club, and how his dad was drunk and drove him mad after trying to bribe his mum through the letterbox. I'm not totally sure what the bribe was for, but you nevertheless get the impression of a guy whose parents are having a troubled marriage. The final troubling verse gives a picture of the perpetrator stalking someone in their home, creeping around their house at night and stating that, I laugh at your locks with my cellulite strip and you won't know who came. After each verse is the chorus of What's My Name, which can be seen as the perpetrator realising that it doesn't matter what he does in his life, he is clearly a nobody, and this feeling of alienation is just going to contribute towards their ever-increasing anger at the world that they live in. When played live, this track comes across as just as raw and angry as White Riot and I'm So Bored with the USA, and was always a live favourite with the crowd, shouting back the What's My Name chorus. After hearing tracks that rage against the country, this rage against what it was like to struggle in life with a dysfunctional family was just another viewpoint of what it was like for the struggling working class in mid-70s London. Track 7, Deny. This is a track that is said to have been written pre-Clash and after the breakup of the London SS band that Mick Jones was in. Jones also said in an interview that Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders, who he was friends with at the time, probably helped with the end bit. It's another rocker that uses a not often used fade-in effect at the start and deals with the subject matter of someone telling a friend that their way of life is going to end them. It's another scenario set in a working class 70s London that highlights what could happen to people who give up and allow themselves to reach total rock bottom, and in this case, prostitution and drug taking. Admittedly, this could be a song about someone in the 21st century, but such was the country in an economic mess with record unemployment at the time, then it is given an idea of the type of person that was trying to get by in the 70s. Unlike What's My Name, where the main character is singing about themselves and their problems, this character, this time, is trying to tell their friend that they know damn well of their dodgy lifestyle, so why are they attempting to deny it? The chorus tells us of the friend's prostitution when Strummer sings that, "Deny, you're such a liar, you're selling your no-no all the time." No-no clearly being a euphemism. Later on in the song, we get the troubled friend then saying that they were going to accompany the singer to the famous 100 Club in London, before saying that it wasn't their scene, but then turning up there all alone. In the third verse we learn that the troubled friend has said that they have given up their drugs, but the singer reminds them that, "Baby, I seen your arms, baby, I seen your arms." Then the final verse, we get the singer's fury that they have clearly been lied to when they ask, "Do you think I'm a raving idiot, just got off the boat?" before telling them that they haven't a hope. The song ends with the constant refrain, "You're a liar," being repeated over and over. The whole album reminds me of what could be called kitchen sink dramas that show a different aspect of the working class Brits of the 70s, but Deny shows that it wasn't just frustrating to live in the world yourself, but also of the frustration one could feel at seeing friends going through a bad time as well, especially when they weren't being honest with you, a situation that probably happened many times with many people. It's another anger-fueled song that reflects the time, and it was recorded at the same sessions as White Riot at the famous Whitfield Studios in London's West End. Track 8, London's Burning. Anyone up for another track about the boredom faced by the youth in 70s UK? Then have a listen to London's Burning. The title is likely to have been taken from the nursery rhyme of the same name, but instead of putting out the fire, this song is talking about how the fires of boredom and frustration are burning brightly, especially in the West London neighbourhood that Joe Strummer was living in at the time. He makes that more than clear when in the chorus he sings that "London's burning with boredom now, London's burning dial 99999. For the uninitiated, 999 is the emergency number used in the UK, but maybe dialing 99999 will result in you making a really serious emergency call? I don't know for certain if that's what Strummer actually meant, and I've personally never dialed 99999, but if you were so fed up with your working class London existence, then maybe anything would be possible. The first verse tells us of the storyteller and their friends driving around West London in an attempt to placate the boredom. Strummer singing that "I'm up and down the Westway, in and out the lights. What a great traffic system. It's so bright. I can't think of a better way to spend the night than speeding around underneath the yellow lights." However, it has also been stated that there could be a different meaning to that lyric, with it maybe referring to the punk drug of choice at the time, which was speed. But with regards to that drug, Strummer would say that "I decided quite quickly that the up wasn't worth the down." The Westway refers to a dual carriageway that runs from Paddington to North Kensington, and so it would have been very familiar to Strummer. In fact, Strummer later told Uncut magazine that songs like London's Burning were more or less all me. A photo of part of the Westway was later used on the cover of the 1999 live album From Here to Eternity. However, just like in White Riot, we get the storyteller telling us that blacks and whites are all facing this bleak existence together, and that a lot of this is down to the TV shows at the time. With Strummer singing that black or white you turn it on to face the new religion, everyone's sitting around watching television. And considering that some of the largest recorded TV audiences of popular programs were in the 70s, then one could definitely see this as a form of religion or anything that takes your mind off the mess of the real world. It is also a track that deals with the alienation felt by many at the time, something touched on in What's My Name. On this occasion we have the alienation of the many tower blocks that were in the neighbourhood and what dour and miserable places they were to live in. Strummer singing that the wind howls through the empty block, looking for a home, I run through the empty stone 'cause I'm all alone. Later in the song, Strummer would tell us that the tower blocks were built in 1963, with hard cash payments from the GLC, which is short for the Greater London Council, which governed London at the time. And then he adds that over there you'll see Westbourne Park, you don't want to go there when it gets dark, which is again talking about a part of the area Strummer was living in, and where he makes it clear that it's not the sort of place that one really wants to be in, especially late at night. It's interesting that Strummer mentions the buildings being built in 1963, because that means that it's only taken about 13 years for the towers to become places that are now rough to live in. This track was a huge favourite live, and Strummer would often change the title to match that of where they were playing, for example, on one occasion singing that Birmingham's Burning, just in case you thought that the album track was only taking a pop at London. Not at all, there were other UK cities that were in the same situation, so, be aware of what's going on in your neighbourhood. Track 9, Career Opportunities. Another short but heavy tune, with the band this time taking shots at the unemployment figures in the mid-70s. It's a track that takes a swipe at the lack of jobs available, while at the same time saying that the jobs that are available are low paid and menial. At the start we get Strummer singing, they offered me the office, offered me the shop, they said I'd better take anything they got. So in other words, it doesn't matter if you have specific skills or if you have an interest in a specific career. If you don't take anything that we offer you, then you may lose your dole money. These jobs are clearly not meant for the betterment of the unemployed person, because career opportunities, the ones that never knock, every job they offer is to keep you out the dock. Therefore, surely it's better to take anything rather than fall into a life of crime, an assumption that may have been made by many of the job centre people at the time. Strummer also tells us that he isn't interested in the army or the RAF and fighting in tropical heat, and also that I won't open letter bombs for you. This is usually attributed to a job that Mick Jones had, where he opened letters for a government department to ensure that they didn't contain mail bombs, which was during a time where letter bombs sent by the IRA were commonplace. Now, if this is true, then that must be one of the most immoral jobs that any unemployed person could be asked to do. Later in the song, it seems that the protagonist is becoming more down by this constant attitude when Strummer sings that they're going to have to introduce conscription, they're going to have to take away my prescription, if they want to get me making toys, if they want to get me, well, I've got no choice. In other words, if they want to push me into a corner, then that's what they will have to do and may well do. And the lyrics were based on situations that the band were very aware of. For example, it's been said that a lot of Paul Simonon's friends ended up all working for the same factory. Absolutely no career opportunities being offered for them. It's interesting that as the Clash became more famous and more wealthy, there was always the chance that singing career opportunities could be seen as hypocritical, but it remained a constant number in their live playlists and was always well received by the audience. And as Strummer once said in an interview, who'd have thought 5 years previously, when we'd written it in Camden Town, that we'd play career opportunities at Shea Stadium? These are the things that make the world interesting. A different version of Career Opportunities would later appear on the 3-vinyl Sandinista album, where the two young children of band friend and session musician Mickey Gallagher sing along to a slightly twee piano version of the song, although the words Civil Service Rules were changed to My School Rules. It's a version that received some negative criticism because Sandinista was already being panned as being too long an album, and tracks like that could have been left out, although personally I find it rather funny. But as a song, there is no doubt in the original's venom at another of the problems faced by the working class in the 70s, and it's worth its place as one of the most favourite of Clash songs. Track number 10, Cheat. Another track that encourages the youth to hit back against the powers that be, and yet one that was deemed by Joe Strummer to be a bit of a filler track. In other words, one that extends the album a bit further. Maybe because a lot of the tracks, apart from Police and Thieves, were fairly short songs. But despite this, it's still a great Clash number, and is popular amongst Clash fans. However, Clash fans in the US wouldn't have initially have heard Cheat, as it was one of the songs dropped from the 79 US release of the first album. It has been said that the lyrics were inspired by the King Mob, who were a splinter group active in London in the 1970s, but there's no doubting the Strummer anger in them, and when in the first verse you get Strummer sing that "I get violent when I'm effed up, I get silent when I'm drugged up," then we have a reflection of the fact that drug taking was indeed part of the deal for quite a few punks at the time. And I've already mentioned in my views of The Night and London's Burning that speed was a popular choice of drug back then. He then sings that if you play the game you get nothing out of it, find out for yourself, try being a goody-goody. In other words, what is the point of just following the rules when you are going to stay downtrodden and poor? That surely something else needs to be done about it. And then in the chorus, that you better cheat, cheat, no reason to play fair, cheat, cheat or don't get anywhere, cheat, cheat if you can't win. Indeed, cheat the system and don't go along with the rules, and why should you when the government is only going to look down on the likes of the working class? And that, as we have alluded to before, that they are too wrapped up in their own self-importance and riches to even be totally aware of what the poorer classes in the UK have to go through. In 2021, I have to ask, what exactly has changed? This is an interesting track lyrically because it can be said that despite the anger that is so apparent in Strummer's early lyrics, it can come across that he is trying to almost educate the youth on what they need to do in order to improve their lot. Not so much as being moral, but recognising that changes in their lifestyle have to change, even if it seems on tracks like this one that you may have to do wrong. And let's be honest, if the ruling classes ignore the problems of the working class, then surely their attitude is wrong too. As the last verse states quite clearly, don't use the rules, they're not for you, they're for the fools. And you're a fool if you don't know that, so use the rules, you stupid fool. It's a track that the band played regularly in their early White Riot and Get Out of Control tours. Not bad at all for what could have originally been deemed a filler track. Track 11, Protex Blue. Another fast-paced but short track running at just over a minute and a half. This one has Mick Jones taking over the vocals and is about, well, it's about condoms. I'm not too aware of many songs about condoms, so it's rather cool that the Clash were advocating their use. Well, that's if they were. Protex is actually the name of a condom brand, and it's one of the tracks that was written in the days of the London SS Band and before Jones had met Paul Simonon. It's a track with some rather dubious imagery, as the song's protagonist tells us of being in a West End bog being UK slang for a toilet, with the guy on the right leaning over too far. And most guys will tell you that that isn't the most comfortable position to be in. But then he tells us that he's got the money for the condom machine slot, so he will then open up the pack, see what type I got. Clearly he isn't someone that just automatically knows what he's going to get, so maybe he is new to this type of thing. The chorus tells us that I didn't want to hold you, I didn't want to use you, Protex Blue, all I want to do. So maybe he doesn't want to get too intimate with the girl, but he doesn't want to use her either. Clearly this guy is in a bit of a quandary. However, the girl he is thinking of is known as someone who is very much used to condoms, for he tells us that it's a fab protective for that type of a girl, but everybody knows that she uses it well. However, let's not jump to too many conclusions about this guy in the song, for the final verse can provide us with a bit of a twist, as he finds himself looking at ads for adult films while on a tube on the London Underground's Bakerloo line, before telling us that I don't need no skin flicks, I want to be alone. So, Is he going to be using this condom with a girl after all? Or is the girl just a fantasy of his? Either way, it's lyrically a bit of a departure from the other songs on the album, as it's not going on about battling the ruling classes anymore, but instead taking us on the journey of a young guy who is exploring his sexual feelings, and it's done in a way that shouldn't be taken too seriously. Even at the end we get the shout of Johnny Johnny, which, rather being the name of the guy, is probably referring to the slang name for a condom. This track also has its place in Clash history, as it was the first track played at a Clash gig. Track 12, Police and Thieves. This is by far the longest track on the album, running at over 6 minutes, and is the only song not written by the band. Not only that, but it's the only track that has a reggae rhythm to it, in a way that they called punk reggae instead of white reggae, probably because you still have the heavy guitar riffs. It's a track that was originally written by a reggae musician, Junior Murvin, who approached reggae legend Lee Scratch Perry, who later produced The Clash's Complete Control. Together, they got together a version of the track that sales-wise did quite well in the UK and the US, reaching 23 in the UK charts. In fact, it seemed more popular there than in their native Jamaica. It's a song about gang wars and police brutality, so when Joe Strummer and Paul Simonon witnessed the Notting Hill Carnival riots in their neighbourhood, the band probably decided that this was a song that just had to be included. It's said that the band would play the track during breaks in rehearsals, before eventually deciding to tighten it up and include it on the first album. It was a masterstroke and is a massive Clash track, and it became a bit of an anthem with the working class youth because it musically and lyrically reached those of many cultures in cosmopolitan working class cities. And this wasn't the only time that the Clash used reggae rhythms in their future songs, notably in tracks like White Man in Hammersmith Palais, Revolution Rock, Junko Partner, Guns of Brixton, and the Mikey Dread produced hit Bank Robber. The lyrics could easily have been written for the Notting Hill riots as well, with Strummer singing that police and thieves in the street, scaring the nation with their guns and ammunition, and then later that all the crowd come in, a day by day, no one stops it in any way. All the peacemaker, third world officer, hear what I say. Possibly the term third world officer may have been a line directed towards the Jamaican police, but if you were a disillusioned youth in 70s London, then you may well have seen the actions of the London police as third world. Then later in the song we are told that you gotta lick the ground, but you are trapped in the middle, punk, which is clearly referring to the punk kids that were so fed up with the way the authorities were treating them and the working class. An interesting fact is that an image of Don Letts, a band friend and later member of Mick Jones's Big Audio Dynamite, facing the police during the 1976 riot, was used for the covers of the Black Market Clash and Super Black Market Clash albums. To me, the song is carried along by an excellent Paul Simonon bass line, which reflects the song's Jamaican roots. It is said that Lee Perry, despite working later with the Clash, was not a big fan of their version of Mervin's song, saying that they had ruined the song with their version. But fortunately, this isn't a view shared by most Clash fans, and not only will it always be a Clash must-listen, but will remain a soundtrack to the mid-70s and the riots that took place. Track 13, 48 Hours. The 13th and penultimate album track, and another short one at just over 1.5 minutes. It's a track that talks about Saturday and Sunday and how young people are trying to have as much fun as possible over that time before Monday arrives, or Jail on Wheels as Monday is called in the song. As the chorus tells us, 48 hours needs 48 thrills, cheap thrills, any kind of thrill. The second verse tells us of how the guy in the song is going to take the tube to meet someone who knows a girl, but he's not very positive about this, saying that she's bound to be rude and that he can't get a nothing at the places I've been. Maybe this is someone who has felt downtrodden for so long in his neighbourhood that he can only think the worst, that nothing positive is ever really going to happen. There is also the suggestion that he doesn't have any money to spend on events, metaphorically saying that everywhere he goes his legs are broken. And every time I miss it 'cause I ain't got a ticket. To me, this is either someone who is either in a low-paid job that he's had to take on, or just one of the many unemployed youths of the time. It's a short song, so you'd be forgiven for thinking that it wouldn't have taken long to write, and according to Mick Jones in the West Way to the World documentary, 48 hours took only 24 minutes to write. But it doesn't seem to be structure-wise a very complex song, so chances are that he's probably being very honest. The punk fanzine of the time, 48 Thrills, was to take its name from the lyrics, as the editor of the fanzine had toured with Clash quite extensively. The song would also be named as inspiration for songs such as Sham 69's Hurry Up Harry and The Jam's Here Comes the Weekend. Not bad for a 96-second track. Track 14, Garage Band. The final track of the album, and despite being just 3 minutes 13 seconds long, it's the second longest out of all 14 tracks. The term garage band might seem normal these days, but the reasons why this track was called Garage Band is far more negative. The NME journalist Charles Shaar Murray saw the band play at Screen on the Green, a venue in North London's Islington, and was damning about their performance, criticising their music abilities and stating that The Clash were the type of band that should be returned to the garage, preferably with the engine running. Pretty nasty as reviews go, one that was clearly short-sighted when it came to seeing the ability and the sound of the band. Strummer responded angrily and afterwards was quite negative about music journalists, but he did say that at least what the critic had said was clear-cut and that he said what he meant, but then so did we. Nevertheless, Garage Band was written as a retort to the criticism. The first verse says that the band were back in the garage with my bullshit detector, carbon monoxide, making sure it's effective. A great line that makes it clear that Shaar Murray was being answered. Not that they were embarrassed at coming from a garage, with Strummer saying in an interview that they was trying to say that this is where we come from and we know it, and we're not going to get out of our depth. But the whole idea of knowing where they come from was also evident in the way the lyrics talks about the band's contract with CBS, with Strummer singing that meanwhile things are hotting up in the West End all right, contracts in the offices, groups in the night. And also, because they were signing to such a huge label, he was asked if the group would wear suits. There was actually some worry from the punk community regarding the record deal, with the London punk publication Sniffing Glue stating that punk died the day that the Clash signed to CBS. But just in case the Clash's fans were concerned, Strummer sings that he isn't interested in what the rich are doing or where they are going, and that they think they're so clever, they think they're so right, but the truth is only known by gutter snipes. But the band were aware that things wouldn't be the same, and that the rough sound that punk was, and all that it stood for, was now being signed up and manufactured by the richer companies, an irony that was probably not lost on them, and not just for the Clash, but other bands of their ilk as well. As Strummer sings, all my bumming slumming friends have all got new boots. Its place at the end of the album is not by accident either. In this album so far we have heard about the band's opinions about 70s UK, but now we have them signed to a massive record label and about to move on. As Mick Jones said, it had to be the last song on the album because it indicated where we're moving to next. Some opinions have said that the track isn't as heavy as the rest of the album, but to my ears I can't actually agree with this. Sure, it may have a bit of harmonica on it, but this is still up there with the rawness of all the other tracks and is a great closer to the album. Also, fun fact, Charles Shaar Murray would later say that the Clash were the greatest rock band in the world. Makes you wonder what made him change his mind, doesn't it? Punk rock was at its height in the mid to late 70s, before the pure anger that drove it seemed to die down, and then, in the UK at least, we saw the birth of other musical movements like the New Romantics, whose music and style of dress was a bit of an antithesis to the punk movement. But while that anger was there, the Clash were the band that put across the opinions of punks in a way that could not be matched by any other band. Yes, other punk bands could snarl and spit and swear about what they didn't like, But Joe Strummer and Mick Jones wrote songs that were raw, but in a way that gave us an album that was like a collection of scenarios in working class UK, using language that was accessible to all and therefore providing us with a no-frills snapshot of what life was really like. Their next album, Give 'Em Enough Rope, would continue with their observations, but would embrace problems that were not just in the UK, but all over the world. The Clash album can almost be called an historical document of the time, but it is also one of the finest rock albums ever, and definitely one of the best ever debut albums. So, that's my track-by-track review of The Clash by The Clash. I hope you found it interesting and maybe you've learnt some new things about the album. And if you've never played the album, then why not tune in and bliss out. I'm Dave Arthur. Take care of yourself and others, and I'll be back with another classic album track-by-track review very soon. Cheers.